Beverly Hills in West LA. So we have multiple sites, and prior to joining the Cedars team over 7 years ago, I initially worked with City of Hope. So I've been in my professional career, I've been in oncology the entire time. So any questions that you might have, I'd be delighted to answer them. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question and just let me know. So I made a presentation that I'd love to share with you. And so I will be doing that. Okay. And so can all of you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, so really the impetus for the presentation is to talk to you and as patients and caregivers, family members, to really think about who makes up the whole family when somebody is uh, working with or living with a cancer diagnosis. So it can be anybody. It can be a traditional family member, family of origin, immediate family, and it could be also a friend. A lot of people have a chosen family. Many people have relocated to our area. So a friend can sometimes provide closer caregiving than even a blood relation family member. So the definition of family is quite broad. Of course, the patient's part of the family, as well as a colleague or a clergy member, a neighbor. And we really can find family having so many different labels. And that's one thing I just wanted to know is that when I say family, I'm not just talking about somebody who is maybe a blood or family relation. So, really, what we want to think about is that when we're caring for a loved one with cancer, that doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. So cooperation becomes the goal because if we're a colleague to somebody or a classmate to somebody who has a cancer diagnosis, we might relate to them and their caregiving needs differently from local or long distance family members, the medical team, the person's social network. So, really, our perspective changes based on how we know the patient. So, what we really want to think about is how do we support the patient with those different roles? So, for example, if I have a colleague with a serious health diagnosis or a cancer, how am I going to support their needs versus if I'm a family member or the primary caregiver? So, what do we do to maintain our patience, maintain our composure when there can be frustrating things in any of these areas based on how we know or how we are related to the person coping with cancer? So, really thinking about our own anxiety, thinking about our motivations for our desire to be a caregiver, whether it's out of love, duty, obligation, desire, concern. Sometimes guilt is a motivator for people, or most often there's a mix of motivations for choosing to be a caregiver or support role for somebody who has cancer. And so, what we want to think about is what would be helpful for the patient and what would be helpful for ourselves. So, where do we find balance between being the caregiver and having our own self-care needs? So, in different cultures, there might be different cultural norms or social norms. We might be thinking that financial burden is something that needs care and the availability of resources, and resources extend beyond the financial into social resources, transportation resources. Maybe somebody needs a meal train, for example, just because the primary caregiver is also a parent themselves, and maybe they're also caring for their children and an elderly parent in addition to their spouse. So really thinking about all of the burdens that a caregiver may experience, and the same for a patient. Patient may be also struggling to balance their own role changes. Maybe they can't work in the way that they used to work. Maybe they can't parent in the way they used to parent. So how do we form part of a team to meet the needs of both the patient and the caregiver, knowing that in this day and age, most of us have multiple roles. We're not one thing or the other. We're a colleague, a parent, a child, a spouse. We have lots of different roles. And based on the generational needs of the patient, that's going to really influence what kind of caregiving needs that somebody might have or might be being asked to provide. So, for example, if we think about the idea that somebody was the primary breadwinner or earner in the household, so how does that impact what caregiving needs they have? So there can be mentoring for the caregiver. There are certain organizations that offer mentorship for caregivers as well as patients, where you can be matched on demographic diagnosis, to really talk to somebody, both a caregiver or a patient, to find out how to navigate this unfamiliar terrain. Because a diagnosis doesn't just impact a patient, it actually impacts the entire system, the entire family, the entire network, and in some cases, the entire workplace, and neighbors or congregations. So, recognizing and respecting the unique family cultures and traditions, and those might differ from our own if we're a neighbor or a colleague. And if somebody is divorced or a single parent, they might have additional caregiving needs that might include planning for the future of their children, finding perhaps guardians, and thinking about family care planning in a different way. So noticing that in a blended family, for example, the various parenting styles of the different relations between step parents, children, primary parents, half siblings, full siblings, we really want to think about the complicated nature of the family constellation and really how can we provide care for all of the people in the family because the kids might need a different level of care. And some cancer centers do have child life specialists who can help with that. Other cancers might not have that resource. So, how to really think about all of the caregivers that are in the picture. So, one of the things that's incredibly important is communication. Communication is the most important thing when it comes to addressing the needs of the patient and the caregiver. We can all of us become anxious, short-tempered. We can all of us not be patient, and sometimes we don't pause and take enough time to hear what somebody's actually saying or requesting. So what we want to do is in our communication style as a caregiver and or as a patient is to be clear and specific in the questions we're asking, the requests we're making, and the answers we're providing. We want to provide guidance when it's requested by the patient that's supportive and positive. We don't want to talk at the person or shame or scold them if they didn't understand, for example, something the doctor communicated, or if they're needing more care. And we also want to identify roles and responsibilities. So, what that could look like is that maybe one person in the family or social network becomes the point person to disseminate information about the patient's medical status, and that becomes one person's role and responsibility. Perhaps another person in the caregiving network takes on the responsibility and role of making sure there's meals. Maybe another person manages the bills and the financial aspects Another person might be able to attend medical appointments or provide transportation. And a lot of people don't have that many people in their social or caregiver network to draw from. So the burden of caregiving can fall on one person, one friend, one spouse, one neighbor. And that's a huge role and a huge burden for anybody to take on. So here are some of the roles, as I mentioned. I named some of them already: transportation, insurance and financial support, advocacy, and treatment monitoring. But some of the other things that we don't think about are spiritual support, emotional support, and we might think about the symptom management or physical care needs, but we might not think about as much home management, who helps with the cleaners and the pill paying and those type of things. And then if somebody becomes a caregiver and the patient has needs such as needing help with toileting or showering, how do we maintain emotional intimacy or any kind of sexual intimacy? So what I'm talking about here are role changes. So if you're going from being a romantic relationship or romantic roles or co-parenting roles to a nursing or caregiving role, how does that impact the intimacy in a relationship? So these are a lot of different roles that one or more people are taking on when they are caring for somebody who's living with a diagnosis. And the diagnosis can sometimes be extremely sudden. It really can impact us as caregivers to think about our own mortality, which is something as humans we're really good at not paying attention to. It can remind us that we're not in control and the world isn't predictable. You know, one of the things that I say when I'm working with people, if they do or don't have an advance directive, is I believe that anybody who's going to get on the 101 or the 405 should really consider having an advance directive. And most people laugh when I say that because we don't think that way. We think that we're in control. We think that when we get on the highway, we're going to make it home fine. And most of the time, 99% of the time, that is absolutely true. And this is a reminder of a cancer diagnosis that comes from nowhere, that changes everything potentially, can remind us that the world isn't as predictable or controllable as we once believed. So, really working with a cancer diagnosis in a family or in a friendship takes a lot of courage. And the word courage comes from the Latin for heart. And so it really takes us showing up in our hearts because we are invited to face our fears of dependency, disability, or changes in ability, disfigurements or changes in appearance. We might not feel the same as we always felt. We might feel shame or shy if our body changes or if we lose our hair. And there might be a fear of emotional intimacy or distance in the emotional relationship. And I think one of the things that some patients take on is that they don't want to ask for help because many of us in this day and age are hyper independent. So asking our caregivers for help, it can be really challenging because for some people, they look at that as weakness as opposed to community building or connection. And so there might be stages of grief. So questions like, why is this suffering allowed or why has it been caused? And then how can I find meaning and purpose in this experience? And those questions are equally valid for the patient and for the caregiver. So there is a process of grief that might come up. And I think one of the things that as caregivers is noticing our spiritual orientation and how that is challenged or supported by becoming a caregiver of somebody coping with a medical diagnosis. So, really trying to make meaning of this can be helpful in some instances. and it can be challenging in other environments. So, for example, if you were to have a hospital bed suddenly show up in the home, what does that mean for the intimacy of a relationship? Or if somebody needs to use a bedside commode, how does that impact? Or if somebody is incontinent, how is that impacting the relationship from spouse or partner or even adult child to parent? Those role reversals and changes can be quite impactful. So what we're looking at is what does this mean for the family, as well as what does this mean for work and finances? Having a cancer diagnosis can place the patient and the caregiver at risk for financial distress or financial toxicity. And connecting with a social worker at your cancer center can be helpful. There's wonderful resources in the community around financial toxicity. And if the person who is the patient was previously the one who paid the bills, for example, maybe now the spouse or caregivers or somebody else in the support system for the patient now takes on the role of paying the household bills. Somebody else might help with the doctor bills about how to navigate and manage health insurance. So this is a lot. And what this impacts also is a person's identity. What that means is the home routines might change and dependence and role balance, as I mentioned, are things to consider about how you as a caregiver feel taking on additional responsibility and also noticing and naming how the patient feels about potentially relinquishing roles and responsibilities. And the routine stability of life can be really interrupted and impeded by doctor's appointments or surgical recovery or side effects of treatments, for example. So social engagement and friendship dynamics also can be impacted. One of the things that can be recommended in this area is to use a schedule, a routine, and to make assignments to other people as much as possible, and ensuring that children and other loved ones are not lost in the shuffle, that everybody is impacted because the family identity can change. Maybe mom or dad was the one who always picked up the child from school, but now it's grandma or grandpa who's going to pick up the child. Or maybe somebody gets admitted overnight to a hospital and a neighbor needs to step in to provide overnight accommodations for a minor child, for example. So these things and considerations can bring families together and they can also create conflicts within a family. So noticing that there is an opportunity to reach out for help, and organizations like Cancer Support Community does offer support groups and therapy, because we know that there's a large impact on both the patient, the children, and the caregivers, and talking to other people can really be helpful and impactful. So listening might change, and in our relationships, we might have a pattern of communication that might not be the healthiest. So listening can become active listening, and this can really help to improve resilience. And that's one of the topics of this talk is how do we improve caregiver resilience? So by changing the way we listen, so we're listening for feelings as well as content, and really ask if the patient wants you to fix what they're expressing or if they just need an ear to listen. Because sometimes there are some generalizations about partners and spouses who can go into fix it mode when the patient or partner is just asking for you to listen. They just want to have an empathetic response to, I'm having a really hard time. my doctor said X, Y, or Z, or I'm really scared of the upcoming scans. So empathy becomes the key to listening. And really, when there's so many competing demands on the shoulders of any one person as a caregiver or a group of people, it might not feel like there's time to listen in a way where you're listening for the feelings, what's underneath the words that somebody's saying. So you want to let somebody know that not only did you hear the words that they said, but you're also hearing that there's some emotion beneath it. And that emotion could be aspects of grief. Grief, again, is really normal for caregivers, for patients in the setting of cancer. Grief can be anger, depression, bargaining with God, which is the why me? Why is this happening? It could be denial and acceptance. Grief doesn't have one order that it goes in. It might also not have an end for a while because medical trauma can be really difficult to navigate. So finding a good therapist or support group can really help both patients and caregivers to navigate this really challenging time. So respecting your own feelings as a caregiver is really important. So noticing when you start to feel burned out, because compassion fatigue, caregiver burnout is 100% possible, not only because you're the caregiver or you're grieving the diagnosis of your partner or friend or neighbor or family member or colleague, but also because you have your own life and your own needs. So when you practice things like using I statements rather than you, so it feels different when you say, I need a break versus you are asking too much of me. So if you say, I need a break, I need some time to myself, I need to go for a walk, I need to go to the beach, I need to go to the mountains or do something else, I think that's really important to notice when you're coming to the boundaries of your own burnout. And that takes really a lot of skill. And especially if the patient themselves is feeling really scared and anxious and they start accusing you, or they might say, you never help me, you don't do this, and you want to argue and fight and say, but I do everything. I've given up everything for you. And so really noticing what it shifts or what shifts in communication when you start speaking from I instead of you. Um, so really trying to rehearse that good communication, either on your own or with the help of a therapist, and focusing on present communication. Because if we're in a long-term relationship or long-term family relationship with somebody, or long-term friendship with somebody, there might be some history of resentments that have built up beneath the surface. And so learning how to communicate from the present moment can be a really important resilience building skill to say, right now, I feel X. Right now, I don't want to bring up the past. Right now, bringing up the past is also hurting me. So we need to find a way to take a time out. So even taking a time out, I feel like I'm at the edge of my patience. I feel that I need to take a break. And getting to know when your nervous system is telling you that you need to step away. So if you're getting headaches or stomach aches, or you feel butterflies in your stomach or tension in your body, those are really good nonverbal internal signals that it's time for you to practice some self-care. So we also don't want to ignore the elephant in the room. And in this context, what that really means is that you let the patient know as a caregiver what it is that you have capacity for. So do you want to be included in their care? How much do you want to be included? Naming that it's a scary time for both of us. It's a scary time for you. It's a scary time for the patient. So you're validating and joining into the patient's experience and letting them know that you're not alone and that you're there to help and support. And there can be vicarious trauma or as a caregiver when you're in the room watching blood be drawn or you're with somebody who's having a really hard time with preparing for scans or even if that your loved one has a port placement, that's a visible reminder that they're in treatment. And that goes home with somebody, that you'll see that when they're showering or dressing. And noticing and naming the important things that you're doing your best. This is what you have capacity for. So, really, as a caregiver, addressing, a lot of us are perfectionists and knowing that we also, as perfectionists, have limits. We can't do it alone. So, naming that I might get it wrong and I might get impatient too. So, what can we do as, you know, lovers, friends, spouses, parents, children to really name I would like to do the best I can. I'm going to get it wrong. I'm going to make mistakes. So, can we partner together to get through this? I understand this is hard for you and you are not alone. We can do this together. So, really inviting a dialogue from the very beginning to set a goal of openness and sharing as early on in the process as you possibly can, and to remind each other that you're on the same team. Because a lot of times when we get anxious or upset or scared, we're we take that out on the people who are closest to us time and time again. And that when we start to get short-tempered or the patient starts to get short-tempered, is there a code word? Like maybe pineapple means, okay, I need a break, right? You throw out a code word or develop a code word together. So sharing your fears and worries, it might be hard and you might disagree and you might even have a fight, but openness will help you deal with that conflict and it'll help you keep supporting each other and reduce stress and anxiety in the long run. So acceptance and sharing will help you keep your relationships strong as you're navigating this unknown and unseen and unfamiliar territory together. And again, meaning and purpose in life is important not only for the person living with the diagnosis, but also for you as a caregiver. So if your coping as a caregiver is compromised, there's a saying you can't pour from an empty cup. So replenishing what it is you need to feel rested and to feel safe in the world and in the relationship is really important. And it's not fair. Nobody deserves to have to go through a cancer diagnosis. So again, to continue the theme of open and honest communication, we want to think about empathy as a gateway to compassion. And compassion is recognizing that the suffering of others is really important. And empathy is trying to understand how somebody feels and trying to imagine how it might feel for you. It's one way to relate. But again, with compassion, we go a bit further. It's feeling what the person is feeling it, holding it to the best of our ability, accepting and taking some kind of action if needed. And again, that goes back to what I said earlier about asking the person and asking yourself what it is that's needed. Is it fixing or listening? And it's really can be for many people a tangible expression of love and taking our time to really take a pause, take a moment to remember that the patient isn't just a patient, they're a whole human being with so many different needs, a complex emotional and spiritual life. That's true for the patient and for the caregiver and the caregiver network. So there are some strategies that can be enacted to help with resilience. So finding balance on a continuum of caregiving exists, right? And it's even in the words that we use. When we say I should, be doing something, that's a watchword for us to notice, oh, okay, am I judging that I'm not doing enough? Am I judging myself in some other way? And really thinking about saying, I would like to or I want to versus I have to or I should. And the awareness of our own needs starts to come into better focus. And our needs are always going to be evolving and evolving because everything changes and cancer can be super unpredictable. And in this world, stable scan results are wonderful. Just stability can be an indication that the treatment is working. And so thinking about our diagnosis as an invitation to really consider how can we show up for ourselves? How can we show up for our patients, even if a patient is not compliant or refuses to follow our instructions or cooperate? How can we support our needs? A patient may choose to discontinue treatment, and they might require more medical assistance than the caregiver is able to provide just through knowledge or physical ability. So, how do we augment our caregiver team with the skills that we need, whether they're physical or knowledge based? And if a patient's refusing help from anybody except for their primary caregiver, there might need to be an intervention or conversation with the patient saying, I just can't physically lift you from the bed to the commode, or I can't maintain my job and parent our children if I don't have help with food and grocery shopping. So, really learning the essentials of communication is important. So there can be challenges and rewards in caregiving. So the challenges can be our own sleeping, our health, eating. There can be pain, fatigue, confusion, again, financial and challenges and role changes. And we might find ourselves becoming irritable, anxious, depressed. We might have changes in our mood. And for some people, they can find the rewards in caregiving, such as increasing intimacy. So we've talked about the impact of a diagnosis on intimacy. And for some people, going through a diagnosis and cancer treatment and then no evidence of disease can increase intimacy. There can be satisfaction in being a caregiver and being needed. And finding balance in that can be really important because when we're giving everything, we might not have anything left from ourselves. So we want to make sure we always keep our own tanks filled so we have something to give from, a place to give from. And then the rewards can be existential reflection, reflecting on our own meaning, purpose, death, and dying can actually be incredibly rewarding that we choose our spiritual existence. We choose meaning and purpose in our life. And satisfaction can be in courageously confronting our own mortality. We could consider building legacies, role modeling for both our siblings, our children, our parents, our colleagues, coworkers, and neighbors on how to approach this role with dignity. And then there can be personal growth from a job well done, from the learnings we've encountered in communication, and again, increased satisfaction. So whenever possible, we want to try to be as proactive versus reactive. So reactive means we're snapping, we're irritable, we don't have patience, we're exhausted and fatigued. Proactive means that we communicate that as caregivers, we also have needs and we can advocate for our loved ones and our own comfort. We can establish a network or a pathway for additional caregiver supports in the community, in our local and long distance families. So even if families long distance, maybe they take on the role of dealing with the insurance company and bills, for example. And developing our own internal and external resources that can look like developing our own mindfulness practice about what do we need right now to feel satisfied And resources can be financial, physical, spiritual, and emotional. So, do we go ahead and make sure we're talking to a therapist as a caregiver, as well as making sure our patient and loved one has what they need? So, learning more about our own processes, our own internal compass is knowledge, and that knowledge translates into power. So, the more knowledge we have about how we react under stress, the better we're able to really find balance in the stressful situation of navigating a cancer diagnosis and process. And learning the medical knowledge that we maybe didn't have up until now. I'm sure you probably found that when you're at a cancer clinic, the providers may speak in medical terms and medical knowledge, and we are assumed to understand what that is. So advocating and say, can you please explain to me what you're talking about?
Yes.
And really thinking, okay, is there somebody that I know that's been through this that can help me navigate this and explain to me what everybody's saying? Because I don't understand half of what's being said in the room. So that's why it's really beautiful to be a caregiver if you have somebody in your network who does have medical knowledge to help navigate that with you and really to commit to growing from the experience because there can be benefits as hard as this is for you as patients and as caregivers. So every situation is different, and most caregivers' experiences do change throughout the cancer experience. It's learning how to kind of surf the unknown waves of both grief and success or any kind of challenges that might happen along the way with the diagnosis. So one strategy is to think about the roles, boundaries, and self-care. And I like this picture because self-care isn't selfish. Again, if we're not putting our needs on the table, then we can't really take care of anybody in a way that's healthy. So really thinking about who can I talk to about what's going on? And that can be a professional, it can be clergy, it can be family, friends, coworkers. How can you determine how much you want or don't want to participate in medical appointments? How can you determine whether or not you have the permission to speak with the provider directly? So that really comes down to the communication in your relationship with the provider. So this is not a sprint. This is most often a marathon. And sometimes in the first year of treatment, you might go through in short order surgery, radiation, and then some kind of systemic treatment. And then a year later, you're like, wait, what just happened to me? Where did my whole year go? And so, really processing the emotional, spiritual piece of what's been going on is important and to look into the resources for that. So it's important to set beneficial timelines if you also have to work as a caregiver and earn a living, and to really say, these are my work hours, these are the times that I'm available, and figure out how to navigate that. And to make sure that you have an outlet for any anxiety, fear, doubt, worry, and that the patient also has an outlet because it's not always the caregiver's capacity to take on both their own fear, doubt, and worry, and also the fear, doubt, and worry of the patient. So, really thinking about a plan for what roles and boundaries you need to set for yourself so you can continue to build your resilience. There could be behavioral things such as meditating, taking a bath, uh, exercising, healthy sleep roles, healthy sleep habits. So all of these things that we might have taken for granted in the relationship now come into focus as things to pay attention to intentionally. And as I mentioned, grief is part of this. We know that grief comes up with any major medical diagnosis, and we can run through the spectrum from sadness to acceptance with everything in between, denial, bargaining, anger. So it's not just grief for the potential impact of cancer on the patient, but also grief for the loss of things that cancer might be impacting. That can include fertility, that can include, if you're in retirement, that could include the dream of spending the retirement traveling fancy free and footloose. You've worked so hard all your life for decades and you're ready to enjoy the retirement. Then to be hit with a cancer diagnosis that might impact those dreams. So the grief isn't just about death and dying, but it's around the loss of a dream for how you want to live this period of your lives together. So thinking about the losses, the changes in function, and also if there's any grief from previous times in life, those items that we were grieving before might come back around. And so if, for example, we had lost a loved one, a parent, we might start grieving that again because when we're having a grief response to something, it often brings up other times that we've experienced grief in our lives. So, really thinking about grief as something that's a normal part and that can really be helpful. So, what strategies can we use to address the impact of diagnosis on physical and emotional health? And you're probably all familiar with the image on the left of you have to put on your own mask before you can help somebody else. So really finding a way to take care of your physical and emotional health before you're taking care of the needs of the patient or anybody else. So the caregiver burden can be extreme and there can be role strain, as I mentioned. And what we really want to think about is if you're having effects like headaches, insomnia, lingering colds, GI upsets, fatigue, um, really thinking about if you're yourself having any physical responses or any issues with your health, to make sure that you're getting some support, not only from doctors, but potentially also from therapists and others in your community, so that caregiver distress doesn't become caregiver burnout and compassion fatigue. And that what this diagram is showing is that there's an optimal level of stress right in the middle of this bell curve where we're super efficient, we get things done, we're on task. But once we start to go past this optimum level, we find that we're less efficient, we're more irritable, we have trouble concentrating and making decisions. So we want to not go past our window of tolerance for our own stress as caregivers. So here are some ideas for self-care that can include baking your favorite treat, exercising, journaling, yoga, or physical activity. Family members include our fur babies. So having some love with an animal that can be really soothing with purring or petting a pet. And planting a garden, reading a book, taking time for yourself, making sure that you have time away from just your role as a caregiver, even playing a board game or having a tea or coffee with a friend. Well, if your loved one needs 24/7 care, you have somebody else come in if possible. There are caregiver respite agencies that can sometimes help with that. And self-compassion. Self-compassion is incredibly important. So being kind to yourself as a caregiver, knowing that you are human and you have limits too, and that you are doing the very best job you can do with your current knowledge and resources, and knowing that your hopes, dreams, and fears are valid and sharing those with others. Finding beauty or joy in small or big ways, maybe big expressions of joy. Maybe going on a vacation might not be possible, but small expressions of joy, like going for a walk around the block and noticing flowers that are blooming or animals that are flying or bees that are pollinating, those can bring small moments of joys joy and those small moments can be built into larger moments. And of course, creating a support network, either through cancer support community, through your clergy or your spiritual community, spending time in nature, and perhaps even reconnecting with lost traditions, activities, or rituals. A lot of people identify at this time as spiritual, not religious. So that some people have lost meaning or connection with their traditions of origin, but they might find surprisingly that they're connected with rituals like lighting incense or lighting a candle or saying a prayer. And the rituals um, might bring comfort in a way that could be important and meaningful and comforting. Just taking a few minutes to connect with something that connects you with your heart and with your traditions. So the surest way to simplify your life is to focus on what matters most. And in this case, self-care is the number one thing as a caregiver that we encourage. And noticing how communication can really improve the relationship at a time when things are so uncertain in a patient and caregiver's world. And noticing those multiple roles can be stressors, and noticing that what you need in the moment matters too. So here are a few resources I wanted to take a couple minutes to share with you. Obviously, cancer support community and in the West Valley, Ventura, Santa Barbara, and then Cancer and Careers, Cancer Care, Cancer Hope Network, and Immerman Angels. They offer mentorship groups. There's Embracing Carers and Inspire. And then Triage Cancer has some wonderful resources on financial toxicity and how to address that. So we have about 10 minutes left in our conversation today. So I'm wondering if anybody has any questions about what I shared. Or any additional suggestions for what's worked for you for self-care, what's been beneficial as you're navigating role changes, or what, as a patient, if you're a patient, what's been helpful with your caregivers? Yeah,
It's another set of ears.
another set of years. And
Yeah.
in what context has that helped you?
In the medical appointments. And my daughter, well, she's got her own family, about 20 minutes from here. But she's right there for everything I need, but I try to respect her time as well. So I'm the cancer patient, not a caregiver. I'm trying to be a caregiver to myself, but it doesn't always work.
Yeah, it's really hard, and we do need, I think I really appreciate what you said about having the extra set of ears. It was particularly difficult during COVID times where the caregivers could not come with the patients to appointments, that there wasn't an extra set of ears. Because when we're sitting in front of a doctor, and this happens for me too, sometimes there's some amnesia if they're giving me information, right? Like we
You
just
forget
go
that
in.
they told you that already.
Exactly. You forget what they told you, or you might go into shock if you hear challenging news. And so not only to have an extra set of ears to remember, but also if you do get challenging information, to give you that emotional support. You just heard something hard or shocking.
Mhm.
And so did in this case, your daughter, and having her there can be beneficial for both of you hearing the news together.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they can ask, oftentimes, she probably asks questions that you might not think of, and vice versa. You ask questions that she might not think of.
I go in with my list and she makes fun of me, but that's okay.
That's a great strategy. I recommend it all the time to keep a list between appointments, because we might get in the room with the provider, with the doctor, and we ask some questions. And we're like, oh, wait, I forgot this, this, and this. And so to keep a running list of questions is a great strategy for yourself and your caregiver for your daughter.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you. And I go to the caregivers group at the cancer support community, and it's just wonderful. All the classes are wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that the cancer support communities work diligently on creating the caregiver support group, and I got to be connected to that process when it happened many years ago. So it's really wonderful to hear that feedback and to really hear that support because it can be so isolating as a patient and as a caregiver to be going through this process. And so wonderful. I know people have made connections. They've gone to breakfast or lunch and made social connections with the caregiver group as well.
Yes. Yeah, and I took the mindfulness class too with Marty and Ko, and that was just wonderful if anyone's interested in that. I think it's coming up again in the fall, right, Ko?
In the spring, yes, and thank you for mentioning that, Lynn. And I just posted our program guide, and then that includes all support groups we offer, and then everything is free of charge for people impacted by cancer. And that program guide includes 2 caregivers support groups, one in online and another one in person. So please, if you are new to cancer support communities programs, please check the February program guide in the chat box.
It's great. And I think it's wonderful to hear that there's an option for in-person as well as online, because some people really like that extra touch or those conversations that you have when you're walking in and out of the room. So
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really helps. It helps you to stay positive when you're always doing things and learning things. It's helped me so much.
wonderful to hear. Thank you, Lynn. I really appreciate hearing that that's been effective. It's something we recommend, and it's nice to hear, your testimony about that.
Yes, it's wonderful. And I do a lot of the things you've talked about, so I was really happy to hear. I go by myself to Palm Springs for a couple days. I exercise. I have a support group. I try to do a lot of things at the cancer community. And I'm a caregiver myself. As well as my husband, I work for Visiting Angels. So that really helps me too to kind of get out of the situation. My husband has multiple myeloma and he was diagnosed 8 years ago.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, you're probably more of an expert than I am, being a professional caregiver as a visiting angel as well. Would you say there's a role for you with ritual and nature in some of your self-care activities? Have you found that to be helpful too?
Yes, in fact, I was going for walks and I started taking photographs of my walks and posting them. I call them Lynn's Lovely Walks, and keep track of the days, and then I pick out a word that I see somewhere and I put that on there too. So that's really helped too. I haven't been walking as much because the sidewalks are so uneven. I've fallen twice, so uh, I probably should walk on the street.
Sorry to hear about the falls. I really like that practice though. I know about 10 years ago, I did a challenge where it was 100 days of beauty. And every day I posted a photo for 100 days of something beautiful that I saw that day. And it made me more oriented to looking for something beautiful.
Yes,
It makes a difference in our mindset for sure.
it really does. I mean, at first, when you're so overwhelmed, it's so hard to get started, but I knew I had to do something or I would get sick. So,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Back to the idea that we cannot pour from an empty cup, right?
yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Gail, anything else before we wrap up?
Yeah, does anybody have any questions? Last question? If not, well, thank you, Jen, again for coming back and the great, very informative workshop. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So, and
Yeah.
then we posted our workshop survey, and then please take a moment to complete the survey and let us know what topics you would like us to cover in educational workshops, as well as in a support group and wellness class interest or request. And we'll do our best to add classes and support groups. So thank you so much, Jen, again. And then thank you for attending this workshop, everybody. Have a nice afternoon and then nice weekend.
Thank
Thank
you for
you.
having me.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.